So welcome back. This session, we're going to cover bass lines. I'm going to go through how I normally make a bass line, the variations and different ways in which you can lay a bass line down. To be honest, this is the fun bit. Once you've made a little groove, if you've been following along, you see we've made this really basic drum pattern. I've got it in arrangement view at the minute. We started in session view, we make clips. As I said, I normally kind of build here in the session view first and then transport everything over. I've got this sharing the whole screen, so hopefully I'm moving around so I can move you out of the way, because I've noticed in the last couple of videos I've kind of been blocking a little bit. So hopefully this is moving. I won't know until I test it. If it's not, I'm still up in the right hand corner, but I'll put myself up there for now anyway. So just a reminder of what we started making, which was a very simple drum beat. We turn the bass line off. As you can see here on this channel, by the way, it's a good idea to name your channel so you know what they are. I'm not going to fuck about and do that now, because you don't want to sit there watching me typing out a load of different bass one, kick, etc., etc. This sound is very bass heavy anyway. So really, if you wanted to create a track and have that as a part of the bass line, you can. And then you can write a bass line over the top of it. So I messed around with an operator, I think, last time, and you can hear I don't really feel that, to be honest. That was just an example. But if you want, there's no real rules in terms of what you use to create your bass, as long as it's filling up those sub frequencies. I could literally just draw more in here and just have that as the B line and fatten it up maybe with the sub underneath. But the purpose of today is to try to cover how bass lines are done and the multiple ways in which you can do them. So I've got an operator on here which I showed you in the last video. But what I'll do is I'll take it off and we'll create again. So what I quite like about this drum beat is I do actually like this sort of tom sound. I'm not sure what it is actually. It is a bongo. So it's a bongo, I think. Have a look. It's just a percussion, but it doesn't give any idea what the key of that is at all, unless my eyes are deceiving me. No, 116 it says. So it's just from a sample pack, it's a percussion hit and it's 116. So how the fuck do we find out what the key of that is? It's a MIDI track. So we can't really. If I click on the MIDI notes, this means nothing. There's no note assigned to it. So a good way to do it is we need to convert this into audio first and foremost. But to convert it to audio, what you can do is you can insert an audio track underneath. Now, I will show you this way. There's two ways. There's a really quick way and there's this slightly longer way. When you see these ins here, so what you can do is you can feed one channel into another. So if I want whatever sound's coming out of this channel 8 into channel 9, I can do so by selecting this here, go down to channel 8, highlight record on there. And then when I press record here, whatever's playing through here will come through and be recorded as an audio. So what you'll see is this MIDI drum pattern will be audio. Let's just play it. So that's one way to convert it. The other way is you can just click it, I believe hold control, drag it down onto the audio track. Am I wrong? I think that used to work. Yeah, well, fucking ignore me. I haven't done it for a while. There was a way you could do it. I think you might have to freeze it and then do it, but it doesn't matter. Once we've got the audio file, what we can do is if I play this, you'll see it's the same. We can use a really cool bit of software called Key Finder. Let's see if it's going to find it. My computer's a little bit shit. There we go, Key Finder EXE. So you can download this for free. Just Google Key Finder. You can see there's a new version. We don't care. So you can download the new version. And what's cool about this is you can take any sample out of Ableton, just drag it in, and I'll tell you what the key is. So I'll drag that in. I will click Run Batch Analysis. Did it drag in? could not upload audio file. Fuck's sake. We're on to a great start today, aren't we, guys? Give me 1 second. Let me just crop this. Maybe this will work. So I will crop the clip down, drag this clip back over to key finder. Oh my God. Finder, not finder, key finder. There we go. Let's drag it on again and see if it works this time. It's being a bit stupid. Normally, what happens, genuinely, you drag it in, you click run back to analysis and it works. There you go, E. So that's telling me that this B line, this note that we've put in is in the key of E. Now, if I'm trying to play an A bass line over the top of the E, it's not going to fit very well. Whereas if I want to create a sub that's going to work with this B line that we've got there, this bongo that we've turned into a bass hit, I could play in the key of E. Now, playing your bass lines in key is really important because you can create a song which sounds great, or you can create grooves that sound great, but then you'll be sitting there listening to it thinking, you know what, it just, something about it doesn't quite work. So if you can get your kick and all of your bass notes in the same key, and all a key is, it's a set of notes. So like on a piano, the key major will be just all of the white keys. C minor will include some of the black keys and miss out some of the white keys. And it's just effectively a pattern. You can Google that and look at that and figure out what keys are what. And there is a way in which you can lock keys in when you're playing. So I believe, and again, I don't use this very much. If you go to MIDI effects, you can do chords. You can use this chord plugin to, or scale, sorry, not chord, scale to set different scales. So you can see like pentatonic minor scale. If I was to put this onto a MIDI track, where are we? Pentatonic MIDI scale. What is wrong with my eyes? There we go. Double click that. Then any note you see, any note you play now on your keyboard should be in that scale. So you can do that and you can set it to whatever key you want it to be. So you don't really need musical knowledge. You can just use one of these and kind of cheat your way through. So yeah, having that in key is really important. So let's say, for example, now I want to add a sub and play a bass line which corresponds with this nice little kind of subby bongo that I've got going on. There's a number of ways I can do that. I can either find a sample, which is in E. I mean, I don't really like E. I normally play in minor scales, if I'm honest. For me, that's just my preference. I could find an E major B line. I can find an E minor B line. It'll probably work because that's just the actual key of E itself. It's not really scaled. You know, it's not melodic. So I can just drag a bass loop in. I could write a MIDI loop in myself. I could take a bass loop. I could chop it down and put it into samples. I can use other elements, other sort of bongos or 808s. I can turn a kick drum if I want into a bass line. There's a variety, to be honest, but I'm going to kind of cover different ways. So the easiest and simplest way to do it is obviously rob a bass loop. But it's not very original. When you start making tunes, you'll start to realize that you'll recognize samples. So you'll hear a track that's released on Beatport and you'll think, motherfucker, I know where that sample's from. But although it sounds cool, it does take some of the originality away from it. I mean, that opinion's up to you. I'm not against using bass loops. As I said before in previous videos, many people use loops, but it does take the fun out of it. If you want to jam along and create something, it's better off just to write it yourself. So let me just drag a bass loop on. Let me just turn this off for a second and we can have a little look through my sample pack and see what's going on. You can come up here. We can search EM, for example, which is E minor. Wait for it to load. Oh, great. Got the good old non-responding again. Time for a puff on the old cigarette, I think. There we go. We can look for bass. So let's take Hector Culto. Go to bass, audition it, drag it straight in. There we go. If we want to extend the loop, we can bring it across. Because we put everything in time in terms of the drums earlier, this should just work quite easily. So let's play. The levels are completely off. So as you see here, these are your levels. My kick drum is kicking at minus 8.86. The bass is at 1.58, which is significantly higher than the kick. Now, the common sort of rule, really, when it comes to your kick and your bass in house music, especially, you need the kick to be the highest element in the track, so it's really pumping through. So to give you sort of a broad idea, just to put you in the right ballpark of where things should be before you go into like a full mix down, it's always good to have your bass line sort of minus 3 dB of the kick. So if that's sort of minus 8, minus 9, we want this sort of minus 11, minus 12. So to do so, you can solo it, you can turn it down, audition, turn it up slowly. So that should work better. That should work better now. We'll come into mix downs and more so what we add on the chain, maybe a little bit later in this video, maybe in a different video, because with bass lines, for me anyway, I tend to find that my bass channel has the most stuff on it in terms of here. So, we'll put a side chain on first and foremost. We'll put an EQ on, we'll boost it up with maybe a saturator, maybe a drum bus, for example. There's a long chain, whereas the kick, as I mentioned earlier, in the previous video, you can just leave that as it is. If you find a good kick, you don't need to really be fucking with that too much. So let's go back to the bass. I've lost it. There we go. That's audio. Easy peasy, lemon fucking squeezy. Now, let's say, for example, you didn't want to nick his B line, but you like the sound of it. Let's zoom in, for example. Let's take this. Let's say this first note here. Let's say you wanted to take this first note out and you wanted to create your own B line from it. What you can do is you can highlight it and you can chop it. Let's delete the rest of this. Now that should be E. I could be wrong. We could check it with key finder, but I'm just going to go on a wild guess now and say this is an E hit, first hit. So if you want to create your own, what you need to do is again convert it and go with MIDI effectively. So there we are, non-responsive again. Fucking Ableton, wake up. Time for another puff on the cigarette. There we go, we're working. So I've got a MIDI channel here. This is where I'm going to talk about the sampler. I mentioned in the previous videos that I use simpler for drums, but I don't use simpler for bass. And I'm going to show you the reason why. So first, I'm going to drop a simpler on just to show you something, right? So if I come back over to this instruments, delete the search bar at the top, and I take a simpler, and I drag this onto this MIDI channel, or double click. What I can do is I could take this bass, give me a second. I could take this bass line, drag it on to there, and I can play. However, let me just go to C. So if I'm going to hit a C note, let me just set my thing back up. So if I'm hitting C, that's C3, and then I play this. See, it's the same. So if that's E and I'm playing C, then what the fuck? I'm not really playing C. I'm playing C on my piano or on my keyboard or on the piano roll. If I show you a piano roll, just to make it easier for you to understand. So if I click C, that's not C. I'm actually playing E, which is what? 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones up. So when I actually play an E, the think it's E. What I'm actually playing is 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm playing a G. So you can get really confused by using a simpler and think you're playing in the right key, but you're actually not because your root sample's off. So a simpler is okay if you're using any sample that's in C because it launches in C. So this is why using simpler for melodic bass lines or anything melodic is just a really bad idea, unless, as I say again, unless the root note is in C. So how do we get around this? We fucking delete it. That's what we do for a start, right? And then we drag in a sampler. The difference between a simpler and sampler, although they're very similar, and I won't go into all of the in-depth parts of it. It's pointless at this point. We're just doing basic stuff. Is when I drag this on, you'll see down here, it asks me for the root note. Now, as long as you set this root note to whatever that sample is, so if that is E, we need to set this as E. So it tells the sampler that that's the sample that's the key of the sample that's coming in. So when I play a C, it will pitch it down. So if I move this, if I leave it as it is, you'll hear it's the same. If I move this up to E, which is the root note, and then play it, it's going to sound different because that's a C. And then from there, completely in key. So when you start playing an actual E here, if I come back in, I just do this as an example. I'm going to do some hits saying E line for you. So you can hear it. So we'll audition this one first so you can hear it's the same. And then this. Let me make it bigger. See, it's the same. So that's why you need to use a sampler when you're going to convert it to MIDI. So now I've taken this, what you can do again is I can delete this now. I don't need this channel. We've robbed Hector's first bass hit. We've converted it into a sampler. We've made sure the root note's in the right place. And now it's completely up to us. We can play along. So if I make sure I'm in the E minor scale, we can just cut this off, press play and start jamming with that bass line and see what we can come up with, which is different. Click the box again, which I keep mentioning because you're just jamming away, you hear something you think you might like, click the box, double click this, go in. It's clearly not going to be in time. I mean, I started here. However, let's just play and have a listen again. So because that's not in time, because I've started playing after I've clicked record, what you need to do is you need to make this first hit the first hit in time with the chain at the top. So to do so, you can come along here. We can go to the nearest bar. You can right click and set as 1 there. So that will now start as 1. Now it's not quite on the 1. So there's an easy way. You can highlight it all. You can right click and you can quantize. This doesn't always work all the time. It might pull some notes where they shouldn't be, sort of to the nearest sort of guideline. However, this should be more in time, but we'll just audition. If you like that, for example, you can just loop this. See how this has pulled that over? Or to get rid of that, you can click loop there. That's now looped, and you've created your own little bass pattern from Hector's sample. As this here is only a 2-bar loop, as you can see, what you can do is right click it, click consolidate, and it will turn it into a 8-bar loop. And at that point, that's where you can sort of change notes on the end if you want. Maybe bring this up so it's slightly different. I mean, I've got no idea how that's going to sound. You can maybe remove one. and it will just tie in nicely at the end. It'll make it a little bit different. You don't want it the same all the way through. So that's how you'll turn any sample into MIDI. Another way of doing it, if you, for example, we'll go back to Hector's bass line. Maybe we'll choose a different one. Let's have a look. Where are we? E minor, there was another one. So this one, you can drag this one on. You can do something. So that's a MIDI track. I'm trying to drag it to a MIDI track. It was trying to convert it to it. Let's create an audio track again. Let's drag it back on. Now, when I double click this, what you can do is you can, what's known as warping. So you can literally change the way in which, where these notes kind of sit. So that's your warp marker there. That will highlight warp markers. So it's automatically trying to chop it into where it should be, where each hit is. So what you can do is right click, slice to MIDI, if we can see it there. You can slice this based on, it's going to do it per slice. So rec slice, why is it not doing that? I've fucked something up here somewhere. Normally what will happen is you'll have the warp markers here. Let's just turn that off. There we go. So we've got some warp markers, and you can click slice to MIDI, and you can do it via warp marker, and that will put it into a drum rack. There we go. Let's see what happens. Just patiently wait for this to convert. So there we go. This has converted it to something slightly different than what I was expecting there. Give me 1 second, guys. Let me move myself out of the way. Try this again. Let me just pop an audio track on. Let's drag the bass line in. Just because it's a Rex file, that's why. Ah, you motherfucker. Let's find something else, just so I can give you an example. So give me 1 second. Let's take bass loops. Let's take this bass loop, drag this in, double click. You can click the warp markers here, so you can set them as where each bass hit is. And what's going to happen is when we click slice to MIDI, we're telling the conversion that each little yellow marker we've made is where we want it to chop. So when we come back in now and we go to slice to MIDI, which is down here, you can choose slice by warp marker. You can do it by half notes, 16th notes. You can do it by bar. You can do it by the transients, which are the little gray things you probably can't see on here. But when you inload an audio, say a vocal, you'll see little gray markers. They're the transients. But it's easy if you want it in time to just convert it via wherever you've put the warp marker. So we'll go to slice to MIDI. We'll do warp marker, and then we're going to put 0 velocity. The reason we put 0 velocity is so when you're playing the bass note, you don't have to hammer the fuck out of the pad or your keyboard to get it to sound at its full volume. If you have sort of the velocity different to that, then if you don't press it hard enough, then it's going to play quiet. So I always do 0 velocity, and then let's click OK. You can see that it's creating 10 slices, and those 10 slices will be based on the 10 warp markers which I've put into here, these yellow things. And each one will go into its own individual pad. So just to remind us what it sounded like. What it tries to do is it tries to recreate the actual bass line itself with a pattern. So you'll see each watermarker is a different note. So if I play this, normally it doesn't sound quite right when we do this, but it might work this time. Now, the benefit of this, sounded okay, is you don't have to mess around and chop around the audio. So if you want this, if you want it to sound like that, you could go, let's say 1, 2, 3. Just draw this in. Make sure your notes are long enough. Maybe bring this across. Pull this up. I mean, that's going to sound terrible, but we're just using it as an example. So if I then turn these ones off, so we can audition this, make sure these two bass lines are off. It's going to sound shit, but it's going to sound like this. You've chopped some of the samples out into mid. Simple example. Write whatever pattern you want. You can play it in on your pad. Now, again, what happens is each slice comes into a simpler on the side here. You can put it as a one shot and it'll play the whole one. It'll play the whole file. If you put it over to classic, when you let go, it'll stop. So you have to hold the whole thing. So if you turned all of these into one shot, well, let's just do these first 4. When I come back to this MIDI pattern, I don't need to do a full long note. It's just going to play the whole note anyway. So let's just try that. Not looped correctly. Sounds terrible, but it's not the point of sounding good. The point is to try and tell you guys how the fuck to do it. So that's chopping and slicing a audio file into a MIDI channel so you can organize and rechange the bass line. Now, another way, or the best way in my opinion, to create a bass line is to add a virtual instrument. So you can either download some VSTs if you really want to spend the money, or you can use the virtual instruments that are native to Ableton. So I believe I've already shown you how to use an operator. You can go into operator itself, you can select bass and you can pick certain sounds. You can upload an operator yourself and change it to sort of that tech house style we did before. I'll just show you again. So we create a MIDI track, double click a blank operator on its own. 2 oscillators, so this one and this one. We're only going to use the 2. This one's a sine wave, as you can see there. To activate the second one, you need to turn it on, so you need to turn the level up. I don't normally go full whack all the way. I'll sort of sit around sort of 30, minus 20, minus 30. Change this to a saw wave. You can, if you want, bring the frequency down, which is taken at the high end, and then let's just play. That's too high. Drop the octave down a little bit. Audition it. So, and again with this, what we can do is we can start jamming. So we'll play. Click this, we've got a kind of a bass line there. Go back in again, make sure that you set this to 1, as I said before, or alternatively, you can take the whole, drag it across to the 1. Make sure it's on the 1. And then you're just messing around with each individual note until it sounds right. So, I mean, that sounds classic example of how you can fuck up the whole timing of it. So you can press Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, and go back. Pull this loop bar across the top down here. Let's do it over a 2-bar loop. So you'll notice that there's nothing here, so we can just add a note there if we want. If you like that, you can just press loop there and just loop that round. For me, it's pretty boring, it's pretty static. However, the purpose was to try and work with this. Now, because we're playing in E, I've got it in the E scale. It might work again, but it's all trial and error. You've got to kind of come out with something and see if it works with the other elements. If it doesn't, change it, mold it, and just keep fucking with it until it sounds right. So you'll find out when you'll start making a tune, you kind of get a groove, and the end of that track, when you've kind of got it to the point where when you feel like it's finished, probably won't sound anything like what you started with. The whole purpose of creating music is trial and error and jamming until you find something that works, right? So normally I'll create multiple different bass patterns and I'll add different drum bits in. I'm always adding stuff and taking stuff away. Now, a tip for you on how to, we'll cover layout in another video, but what I tend to do is I tend to create a short little loop like this, and then I'll fill this whole fucking block to the fullest point of the tune. So I try and get as much elements in there that work together, and then I do it in a subtractive manner. So I'll take things out as I'm laying the tune out. But let's see if this little shitty pattern we've made works with this. Let's just listen. Not quite, slightly out of time. Again, you can press Control A to highlight everything. You can right click, you can click quantize to pull it into time. So the tonality is fine. It's not really clashing or anything like that. So as long as you pull together a pattern which works for you, which is what I would do with this, and I'll just keep doing clips. Normally, as I said before, I tend to mess around in this section because I can just create multiple clips of the same one, and when I'm happy, I just drag them across. Let me just delete all this stuff so we can get back to it. Another thing, sorry for the delay. I'm quite shit at teaching. I did kind of write down a few notes of what I wanted to do to kind of cover. Is you can take, say, 808, so you can use drum beats to turn them into a bass line. So for example, let's find an 808 kick drum. So we can go across to drums or samples in Ableton. Wait for it to load. Back on the old non-responding. Gotta love that, haven't we? Let's type in 808. And this sound has been absolutely rinsed with the trap guys. It's just a kick drum. You can use that kick. You can use the sub. It's a bit too low. But you can take this kick, for example, and let's just drag this on. So it's there. We can then come back. We can create a sampler, a simpler, either one. That should be in C. Most of these samples in Ableton tend to be in C, but if you're unsure, just drag it into Keyfinder, and Keyfinder will let you know what it actually is. So again, we'll take a sampler onto this MIDI track that we haven't created yet. Let's pop this down. Let's drag this on. Too low. I'm going up the octaves. Because I'm playing in E, it's noticing it's in E, but the original sample's in C. So really there's a sweet spot really for these in terms of certain notes. So just play with your piano, play with your keyboard until you kind of find that sweet spot for this. I'd say it's these 3 notes, 4 notes. You can draw it in. We're just going to take this off for a second. Let's just press play and have a jam. Click the little box again, capture what you've done. It's going to sound terrible because it's going to sound really quiet. Again, it's going to be out of time because you played it in. I'm going to highlight these notes. I'm going to move it onto the 2-bar, the 3-bar there because I know that's going to be on time. I'm going to loop this section here. Click loop, and we're just going to play through that. Make sure it's on the actual grid itself. It's on there, not the other side. If it's slightly over, it won't play. It's like you can swing it a little bit with bass lines. You can move it if you want manually. You know what I was talking about with the drums. However, let's just play that on its own. Probably better with this, with the simpler, to be honest with this. This you can change a sampler to a simpler. There was a way. I can't quite remember how to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sack that idea off. I'm just going to keep the MIDI notes there. I'm going to take the sub again. I'm going to drop a simpler on. Trial and error, man. You know, I've been doing this shit for about 12 years on Ableton. And like I said, one of the first videos, I don't know everything about absolutely everything. You don't need to either. You just need to know what works for you and how to create a beat. Because this program is really complex. You can start doing all sorts of mad shit and creating your own plugins and all sorts of crazy stuff if you want and get really scientific. But if you just want to jam and make beats, there's no real point. So let's just drag that 808 back on again. Let's just go back with a simpler. Type 909. This ain't going well, is it, guys? This session? Fuck me. Let's find the kick drum. There it is. Drag this in. We'll hit it on one shot so it plays the whole note. And let's play this pattern. All that bit. Now, you'll see it sounds quiet, and this comes down to the velocity there. Highlight that and turn it up. Now we've turned the velocity up, it's a bit louder. You can go and check your level again. The level's going to be way off. Let's have a look. Like this. We needed it, remember, around sort of -12 to work with the B line, to work with the kick. Let's leave it there for a second. So this should sound okay, in theory. It's off. So we're going to maybe move that to the middle. What I like to do as well, sometimes when it comes to this pattern here, you've got, as you zoom in, you'll see there's grids. So you see these little white lines here. It normally sounds quite nice when you'll put a small note there, that in the middle, for example. And we'll put this there. It's all right. It's nothing to write home about. However, it's just an example that you can use kick drums for bass lines. I could cover virtual instruments, but you might not have any, that are the same as me. You could take a horn, you could take anything and just really go down the scale in terms of the low end of the octave when you're playing and see if that bass line works for you. But for now, what we're going to do, just to get something into this tune, because the idea is really we've started making this beat together. We'll probably go through to a finished track. That's probably the best way for me to show you guys. So I'm going to do the classic. I'm going to Control Z. Remember, Control Z will just undo everything you've done. So let's Control Z until we get back to that operator that we had on before. I have to press it a few times. Get the old DJ finger on it. Come on, motherfucker. What's going on there? I'll probably crash the program, but don't matter. Let's keep going. There it is. There's the operator, right? So we're gonna use this operator to make a bass line that works with this bongo that we were talking about. So let's just record something in. We'll make sure we're in the key of E because that's in E. We'll use this because I quite like it. Let's go down the octave. So let's go. Let's kick the whole jig. Highlight it. You just keep fucking until you find something that you like, and there's going to be a whole heap of it that's going to sound shit, but just keep going. Unless you're like a musical fucking master, and you're probably not if you're watching this video. Just keep playing. A little bit in there that I like, so I'll capture it. I'll open this up. I'll come back. So I liked it up until this note. So that probably should have went higher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all this. I'm going to right click. I'm going to quantize it. See how this quantized the wrong way? You need to notice your grid. You're playing on your grid. And I know that says 7. That's because there's a lot recorded in. But if you want, you can right click. You can set that to 1. So you know that's the 1. You can delete all this shit that you don't need. You can crop the clip if you want. And then check everything's in time. And we're going to look at changing this note. We're going to get rid of these as well, because that extends past. You never want to make a 3-bar loop, even 2, 4, or 8 really, because otherwise it won't loop round in time. So we're going to loop this over 2 bars. We're going to play it back. We're going to make sure it sounds fine. I'm going to move this to make sure it's the right key. So if we put this up, maybe there. Oh, possibly down a little bit more. Let's try this one. That's better. That's better, you know. That would work. You can extend this out. That would work with this. It works with this bongo, and it works with the tune. So very repetitive. You can consolidate it. Typically what I'd do is I'd chop it into 4-bar loops. I would then concentrate on this section, and I'd change the ending to make it just a bit different, so it doesn't always repeat around the same. So you can just, if you want to concentrate on a section, click it, press Control L. And what we'll do is we'll get rid of these two. Or maybe extend this note. Maybe put it back there. And then what happens is over the 4-bar loop, it'll just sound different at the end. Just so it's not so repetitive over and over again. Now, coming to the actual balance and the channel. So that will sound awful because there's nothing on it. It's not mixed down in any way, shape, or form. I'm just going to move this across. I'm also going to take this channel, and this is the bass line. I normally like to drag it next to the kick. Move like that. So I can solo two at the same time. What you need to know about, first of all, the level. You'll see it's clipping at 6, so it's kind of going louder than the kick. We don't want it to do that, so we'll turn this down. There's a high note in there somewhere that's fucking up. Let's just triple check. Wrong one. It's up here. Zoom out and have a look up. This one. Delete that. What you need to do is side chain the bass to the kick. And what a side chain does is it allows, because your bass and your kick are going to clash, it allows the kick to come through when the bass is playing. It also enables you to turn the bass up louder, so the bass is fatter, so the whole tune and the whole sonic spectrum in the low end is better. So I'm going to show you quickly how to do a side chain. Now this is the first fucking thing you add to a bass line. Don't put any EQs on it, normal compressors, any other effect at all. Just side chain the motherfucker first to your kick drum. Ideally, your kick drum should be the same tone as your bass line. The kick's in A, we've wrote a bass in E. If it sounds okay, it sounds okay. It might cause us an issue later on. We can either change the bass line, we can change the tonality of the bongo that we've kind of made this bass line fit with, or we can just change the fucking kick. But this is just an example, you know, we're not perfecting something. We'll see how we get on a bit later on. So to put a side chain on, you need to come to audio effects and you need to go down to glue compressor. Make sure you've got this selected. Click on the glue compressor. And this little arrow here, select that. Click side chain, which will enable the side chain. And then you then need to select what it's going to be side chained to. So we're going to side chain it to the kick. And what we're telling this compressor to do is every time the kick plays, the bass line ducks a little bit, which allows for some room. So you'll click here, you'll click the kick drum. If I press play, nothing's going to happen yet. Ready? It's the same. That's because you need to turn the threshold down. The threshold is telling you how much you want it to compress. Now, I normally slap the bastard. Like when I first started making tunes, I'd side chain just a little bit like this. I think, yeah, that's enough. It's bollocks. You need to slap the fuck out. Now, what's important is when the side chain kicks in and when it releases. So attack and release are these two knobs here. Attack is when you want it to start. So if you look at the kick sample, let's say that's the start. Let's say that's like, if I come back here and we look at this, let's say 0.1. So we want it to start at 0.1, the very fucking start of the kick. And then we want it releasing. If you look at the size of this kick, and if you remember from the early tutorial, I like to fade off sort of around 150 to 200 for the kick. The fattest part of the kick's kind of around here. You can see that with the waveform. So really we want it to kick in straight away. We want it to release around sort of 2. So it's not ducked too far after the kick stopped playing. So now you'll see this will start moving a bit faster. Now, what you're probably thinking is you fucked the bass line up because it sounds really quiet. So if I take this off, you'll hear the difference. Sounds a lot fatter, right? However, don't be fooled. It does sound quieter, and then you boost it afterwards. So a typical thing you could do once you've done that is add a drum bus. And what this will do, it will fatten it up, but it will fatten up the frequencies that haven't been ducked. You can turn the drive up a little bit. You can turn the crunch up if you want. The boom is like an extra bit of bass. Now down here, you've got sort of what frequency you want it to be. So if we're working in E, you can see we can go to E0 there, which is going to boost the really low end, or you can go higher up and boost it this way. And this is sort of what frequency. It goes up to 90 hertz, which is a real low end frequency. So if we wanted to boost there, it's going to add more bass. So the sound, that boost, you got to be mindful. Sound is going to come up. But you can turn that back down a little bit. But it will be fatter, so about there. So that should work okay. Now, that will sound, trust me, if I highlight these two, if I can highlight them both together. I can't by the looks of it. I have to put them in a audio effects rack. Leave that for now. I was only going to do it so I could turn them both off at the same time so I could show you. So if I turn this off, and then I turn it on. You can control this with the limiter as well, if you want to add a limiter on there. But either way, you can put a saturator on. So, for example, let's grab a saturator. This will give it some more warmth in terms of the low end. So you can put a simple saturator on. You can switch it to sine. I mean, I don't really like that bass line. I just didn't want to spend ages fucking around trying to make a pattern that I thought I'm really going to like. So the purpose of this bit is just to show you what's what. However, the fun part is fucking about. And I would have probably been here for a while just messing around until I found a groove that I absolutely was sort of vibing with. However, I'm still not quite satisfied with this. I will change the bass line, and when I come back in the next video, when we move on and we start talking about something else, I'll probably have a completely different bass pattern. You can see there it was fucking up at the end because that wasn't quite right. So here's a tip for you. Make sure you keep an eye on these lines here. It started the second clip, so I'd only drag that across a little bit. So we're actually working on a 4-bar loop, or we should have been. We're doing it over a 3. I'll tell you what. It's because I ended. That's why I changed it. Let's get rid of this top one, and then highlight all of these. Remember, I changed the last bit, and then just consolidate that, and then let's delete that. So the line's right. So if I then stretch it out, if I click loop, it will fall in time. You know, this line here won't be here, which will throw everything off later on down the line when you come to layout. Again, bassline's all right. I think it does take away some of the essence of this that we liked in the first place. So I could just reduce some of these and almost make it like a call and response. So you want it to work with this as well. So you see there, it's clashing. This one. There. Take them out. That's again. That's off. I can see that. And this overlaps this. What it's going to do is slide into it. So shorten that down. See that there? And it's fucked. So you got to be mindful of where your notes are. Again, that's going to clash. So we're doing like a call and response. So this will, the bass line will hit, you've got the nice little bongo, then the bass line hits, and those should work together a bit better now. So hear that last one, this one clicks. Cool. If I wanted to, and I didn't really want this in there, what I can do, I didn't really want that as a baseline. I could come to it, I could get rid of the low end, slab the sound in at a higher frequency, so it's not going to clash. And then what I could do is I could write like a full funkier bass line. So let's say, for example, if I turn this off and then we're just going to play another bass line again, let me go down. Little mad wobble. can consolidate that down, double click, put this in time again. You can quantize it. So always make sure your notes hitting on the right space, not overlapping, as we're going to get a slide, like I said before. Sometimes you'll want that slide, it's cool. Just depends on the sound you're going for. I'm going to move this over, extend that out, and then just drag it across. Let's first click the loop. Remember the loop to loop the clip. Drag this across. With this, because I've taken this out, I don't really need to consider what bass line I make. You know, I'm not making space for that to come through to work melodically. But because we like this and we're going to work with this, that's why I've gone with something like this instead. Again, subject to opinion, whatever sounds good for you. But hopefully you've learned something about making bass lines and different ways to kind of find a bass line. Your bass sound that you choose is entirely up to you. Your pattern that you choose is entirely up to you. Just the real important thing with bass is your blend, where it sits within the mix, how it sits with your kick drum, how it sits with the other elements in the track. You get different sounds of bass. You can get some really sort of wide sounds. What you don't want is you don't want a bass that's really wide in terms of sonically. So one thing I need to mention for you guys, which is always good to know, is there's a thing called a utility, which bass should be in mono, not in stereo. All your other elements can be in stereo, means they're playing in like the best way to explain it, I suppose, is in like a wider field. Whereas you want your bass and your kick like straight down the middle. So what you can do is put a utility on and you can put it in mono. You can just put the bass frequencies in mono if you want, and you can tell this bit zero width if you really want it to. This bass in mono is saying that anything that's below 120 hertz is going to be in mono. Anything above 120 hertz won't be, which is cool if you've got a wide bass line and it's got some really kind of funky top end to that sound. But you want your kick as well, often in mono. So I know I said don't put anything on there, but drop a utility on a kick drum, whack it in mono, and it should sound. You won't really notice much of a difference there, but just do that out of habit. So that's pretty much most of what I've got for today for bass lines. I know we haven't created anything spectacular, but this tune, by the end of this whole course, will be a fucking banger, I promise you. But any questions, let me know. Peace.